The evening air was crisp and gentle, carrying a faint scent of flowers from the garden outside. She stood for a moment at the entrance of the grand building, looking at the lights streaming from the windows. The party was already in full swing, laughter and the clinking of glasses spilling out into the night. She adjusted the strap of her simple dress and took a deep breath. This was not a world she usually belonged to. The people she was about to meet were powerful, influential, and wealthy. She had grown up in a quieter life, one where talent mattered more than money, where respect was earned through skill, not status. Tonight, everything would feel different. As she stepped inside, the warm light of the chandeliers cast a golden glow on the polished floors. The room was buzzing with conversation. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant gowns moved gracefully, holding champagne glasses with effortless confidence. She felt a small knot of nervousness tighten in her stomach. She had always been comfortable in her own space, performing in small gatherings or local events, where everyone knew her for her talent. Here, she was just another face, someone easy to overlook. She walked slowly, trying to find a balance between blending in and not disappearing entirely. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the clusters of people deep in conversation. Some guests were laughing at private jokes. Others were engaged in serious discussions. A few glanced her way only briefly before turning back to their companions. She could feel the weight of judgment in those looks, subtle yet unmistakable. It was as if they had already decided she did not belong here. She remembered the reason she had been invited. A friend from work, who knew her musical talent, had suggested she come. "They could use some music," the friend had said, "and you might find it interesting." She had hesitated at first, unsure if she should intrude on such a gathering. But curiosity had won. She had always wanted to see this world, to understand how people who lived so differently from her saw life. And she knew that even if no one here paid attention to her, the night would still be a story worth experiencing. The room opened up into a larger hall where the piano stood in the corner. She paused for a moment, drawn to it instinctively. Her fingers itched to play, but she reminded herself to stay calm, to move slowly, and to observe. People walked past, some noticing her presence, others not. She overheard snippets of conversation, words that made her realize just how little these people knew about her. Comments about newcomers, about people who didn't seem like they belonged, floated through the air. She forced herself not to wince, not to let the whispers affect her confidence. A man in a sharp suit approached, offering a polite nod and a smile. "You must be new here," he said. "Are you enjoying the evening?" She nodded, giving a small smile in return. She could tell from his tone that he did not expect much from her, that he was being courteous out of obligation rather than genuine interest. It was a feeling she was used to, though it still stung a little. She reminded herself that tonight was not about approval. It was about presence, about quietly holding her space without letting the room intimidate her. She moved toward a small group near the center of the hall, listening as they spoke about investments, luxury trips, and business ventures she had little knowledge of. She did not interrupt, but she stayed close enough to feel the energy of their conversation. It was different from the small, intimate gatherings she was accustomed to. Here, words were measured, smiles were calculated, and laughter often carried a hint of performance. She realized that understanding this world required patience and keen observation. One could learn a lot just by listening. A waiter passed by, offering hors d'oeuvres on a silver tray. She accepted a small bite, letting herself blend in as much as possible. Even in these small moments, she felt the subtle divide. Some guests barely touched the offerings, holding their glasses like trophies. She wondered what it must be like to move through life with such privilege, where attention was automatically granted. Yet, she reminded herself that tonight, she had something they did not expect. Her talent, quiet but ready to be revealed. The music in the background shifted slightly, a soft melody that filled the corners of the hall. She felt a familiar pull, a memory of her own performances. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, imagining her fingers on the keys, the sound flowing naturally. It was a grounding thought, one that reminded her of who she was beyond the dress, the shoes, and the cautious smile. She was a musician, someone who could communicate without words, someone who could command attention through the purity of sound. As the evening progressed, she noticed small glances in her direction. Not all were dismissive. Some eyes lingered, curious about this quiet presence. She met a few smiles, polite and brief, but they carried a hint of genuine intrigue. Perhaps they sensed there was more to her than they initially assumed. She welcomed these moments, letting herself relax slightly, even as the room continued to hum with activity. She found a quiet corner near the piano, leaning slightly against the wall. It offered a vantage point where she could see most of the room without being fully in the spotlight. From here, she observed the dynamics of the party, the way conversations shifted, the way alliances were subtly formed, the way laughter was used to gauge attention. It was fascinating, almost like watching a dance where every step had meaning. She felt herself learning, not just about the people around her, but about the subtle ways in which influence and perception worked. A few moments of silence allowed her to hear her own thoughts more clearly. She reflected on the journey that had led her here. The years of practice, the small victories, the quiet determination that had kept her moving forward despite doubts from others. She realized that this night, with all its glitz and silent judgments, was simply another stage. And like any stage, it was not about where you stood initially, but about what you did with the opportunity when it came. The evening was still young, and she felt a growing sense of anticipation. There was something in the air, a subtle tension that suggested that the night could change in an instant. She did not yet know how, but she trusted that her preparation, her talent, and her calm presence could make a difference. She reminded herself to stay observant, patient, and ready. And so she waited, quietly, confidently in her own way, aware that she was underestimated by many around her. But she also knew that sometimes, the most powerful moments came from the quietest beginnings. This was her chance to step into a world that did not expect her to shine, and she intended to make it unforgettable, starting with just being herself in that grand, glittering hall. The night was full of potential, and she was ready to let it unfold, one note at a time, when the moment came. As the evening went on, the room seemed to grow louder, not in volume, but in the energy of the people gathered there. Groups shifted and merged, laughter rang out, and conversations carried the weight of status and expectation. She remained in her quiet corner, observing, feeling the invisible lines that divided the room into circles of influence. Some guests moved with ease, confident in the knowledge that they were known and respected, while others navigated with cautious politeness, unsure where they belonged. She was somewhere in between, unnoticed by most, underestimated by almost all, yet fully aware of the dynamics around her. A few people approached her, speaking politely but with a tone that suggested they did not expect much. "It must be interesting to be here," one man said, glancing at her dress as if measuring her worth. She nodded, offering a soft smile, careful not to reveal any irritation. It was a familiar feeling, being underestimated, yet she did not let it control her mood. Instead, she reminded herself of the strength she carried in her own talent, something invisible to the eye but undeniable when revealed. She could sense that the room had already formed opinions about her, and she accepted that she could not change those in a single moment. She wandered slowly, trying to find pockets of conversation where she could quietly listen. People spoke of achievements, vacations in faraway places, investments, and luxury experiences. Each story sounded impressive, yet it also felt hollow at times. She noticed the smiles that were measured, the nods that were polite but empty, and the occasional glance toward someone who held influence. It was a world built on perception, on appearances and subtle power, and she realized that her presence challenged that in an unexpected way. Several guests laughed at a joke she barely heard. She caught the tail end of a comment meant to dismiss her, spoken just loud enough for her to notice. Stung, but she let it slide. She had learned that proving oneself through argument or confrontation rarely worked. Instead, quiet confidence, patience, and readiness to act at the right moment could make far greater impact. She adjusted the strap of her dress, took a deep breath, and moved toward a slightly quieter section of the room, feeling the tension settle in her shoulders. She did not need approval, only space to be herself. Nearby, a small group of guests were discussing music, casually mentioning famous pianists and performances. She lingered at the edge, intrigued. Their knowledge was surface level, filled with names and awards, but they spoke without any real connection to the art itself. She felt a quiet smile forming on her lips, knowing she understood music in a way that went deeper than name recognition. To her, it was about emotion, about telling a story without words. The conversation stirred a subtle excitement inside her, a reminder that her moment would come, and when it did, it would speak louder than polite smiles or dismissive glances. A man with a briefcase approached her, introducing himself with a firm handshake and a practiced smile. "So, what brings you here tonight?" he asked, his voice courteous but slightly condescending, as if the answer mattered little. She responded calmly, explaining her connection to the host and her interest in experiencing the evening. He nodded, his expression polite but distant, clearly expecting a short, unremarkable reply. She gave him a small smile and moved on, realizing that her presence was more than enough for now. She did not need validation from someone who could not yet see her worth. As the night progressed, she noticed the subtle ways people underestimated her. Some would glance her way and then quickly look away, as if her quiet presence was inconvenient to acknowledge. Others whispered to each other, making comments she could not fully catch, yet enough to sense that assumptions about her had already taken root. She did not feel anger, only a calm understanding. Life had taught her that those who underestimated her often created the perfect stage for her to shine. Patience, she reminded herself, was her ally. She found herself near the piano once more. Its polished surface gleamed under the soft light, and she felt a familiar pull toward it. Her fingers tingled with anticipation, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine the sound flowing through the room, turning heads, capturing attention. Yet, she remained where she was, watching, listening, and waiting. The timing had to be right. This was not a moment to rush. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a tool for expression, for connection, and she knew that when the right moment arrived, she could command it in a way that words alone never could. A few guests approached, curious about her quiet demeanor, asking polite questions about her background. She answered calmly, revealing just enough to satisfy casual interest without giving away the depth of her experience. They nodded, smiling, clearly assuming she had little to contribute beyond pleasantries. She returned their smiles with a subtle, self-assured grace, knowing that perception would soon shift, though they could not yet see it. She felt no need to hurry. Her moment would come naturally. The conversations around her continued, a mixture of business talk and casual chatter. She observed patterns, noting who dominated discussions, who listened, and who quietly judged. It was fascinating to watch, almost like a performance in itself. She realized that in this room, people were often valued more for their perceived influence than for their actual talent or character. It reinforced her belief that true recognition often came unexpectedly, through demonstration rather than words. She felt a quiet thrill, imagining the surprise on faces when the unexpected could finally unfold. She noticed one guest in particular, a well-known figure in the business world, glance her way briefly and then quickly look away. It was a small moment, but it gave her insight. People like him were accustomed to being impressed by appearances, status, or known achievements. They did not often encounter someone whose quiet presence hinted at unseen abilities. She felt a subtle smile, knowing that her talent, once revealed, could change their assumptions entirely. The thought gave her strength, reinforcing her patience and composure. A waiter passed by again, offering drinks, and she accepted a glass of water, feeling the cool liquid steady her nerves. She moved slowly along the edge of the room, observing, taking in the atmosphere, and quietly noting the energy of the guests. She was learning, adapting, and preparing herself. Every glance, every whispered comment, every polite smile added to her understanding of the social terrain. She did not need to force attention. She simply needed to be ready for the right moment to show what she could do. Time passed, and the night deepened. She remained calm, almost invisible, while others engaged in their performances of charm, confidence, and influence. Yet she felt no discomfort. She had learned that the world often underestimated quiet strength, and in that underestimation lay opportunity. She watched as people continued to assess each other, unaware that someone they overlooked possessed something they could never predict. Her patience, her self-awareness, and her talent were quietly gathering power, ready to make their mark. She moved closer to the piano once more, letting her gaze linger on the keys. It was a familiar comfort, a reminder of countless hours of practice, of moments when music had been her companion, her expression, and her escape. She felt a pulse of excitement, imagining how the room could change once the music began. The people around her would be forced to see her in a new light, to recognize the depth of skill and emotion that she carried. She took another deep breath, feeling grounded, prepared, and confident in her ability to rise above the quiet underestimation. As the guests continued to mingle, she noticed that subtle curiosity had begun to spread. A few more eyes lingered in her direction. Some guests whispered, wondering about the quiet woman who seemed so calm amidst the bustling room. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that attention, once earned through genuine talent, would be far more powerful than anything demanded or forced. She had been underestimated, but that only set the stage for her moment to shine. The night was a dance of conversation, observation, and subtle judgments. She moved through it with quiet grace, fully aware of how people perceived her, yet undisturbed by their assumptions. She had a sense of timing, a sense of readiness that would allow her to transform the energy of the room when the moment was right. She did not rush. She did not force recognition. She simply existed in the space, confident that her presence, her preparation, and her talent were enough. And so she waited, quietly observing, patiently navigating the complex social terrain, aware that the underestimation surrounding her was temporary. She trusted that her skill, her confidence, and her readiness would soon speak louder than any assumption. The night held possibility, and she felt the calm excitement of knowing that she would have her moment to command attention in a way that no one could ignore. The gentle hum of conversation filled the hall, punctuated by laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the subtle notes of soft background music. She remained near the piano, her eyes tracing the curves of the polished instrument, imagining how it might sound under her fingers. The moment she had quietly waited for was approaching, though she did not yet know exactly how it would be initiated. She felt a sense of calm readiness, like a musician before a performance, knowing that timing and presence were everything. Suddenly, a voice from the other side of the room drew her attention. One of the hosts, noticing her quiet presence near the piano, called her name with a polite, almost teasing tone. "Would you play something for us?" The words carried a mixture of challenge and invitation, as if expecting her to politely decline. She hesitated for a brief second, feeling the eyes of several guests turn toward her. The air seemed to shift subtly, a quiet tension forming as the room sensed that something unexpected might occur. With a small, confident smile, she approached the piano. Her fingers brushed lightly over the keys, feeling the smooth, cool surface beneath them. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the space, the people, and the energy of the room. Then she began to play, softly at first, letting the melody unfold naturally, each note carefully chosen, each chord carrying emotion. The music filled the corners of the hall, weaving through the conversations and gently capturing attention. The effect was immediate. Guests paused mid-conversation, some turning their heads toward the sound, others stopping entirely to listen. The atmosphere began to change, shifting from casual chatter to quiet focus. Her music spoke in a way that words could not, drawing people in without effort, commanding attention without arrogance. It was clear to anyone listening that the music came from a place of deep skill and genuine emotion. She continued, letting her fingers move with fluidity and confidence. Each note built upon the last, creating a story that was entirely her own. People began to gather around, forming a semicircle near the piano, their initial skepticism replaced by curiosity. Eyes that had barely noticed her now watched with admiration, whispers of surprise passing between guests. The woman who had seemed quiet and unassuming was now the center of attention, though she carried it with grace, letting the music do the talking. Some guests leaned closer, trying to understand the subtle techniques, the expression in her performance. Others simply listened, letting the sound wash over them, feeling the emotion conveyed in every chord. She noticed the change in demeanor, the slight widening of eyes, the small nods of appreciation. Those who had underestimated her were now confronting the reality of her talent, and the shift in perception was almost tangible. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, navigating complex passages with ease. The melody swelled and softened, capturing the room in a delicate dance of emotion. Laughter and chatter had disappeared almost completely, replaced by the quiet sound of music and the soft gasp of admiration. Some guests exchanged looks of surprise, realizing they had misjudged her entirely. Others whispered quietly to each other, sharing their astonishment and wonder. She remained focused on the keys, yet she could feel the energy of the room responding to each note. A man who had initially dismissed her presence now stood near the piano, clearly impressed. He whispered to a colleague, his tone a mixture of surprise and admiration. She smiled faintly, understanding that her performance was rewriting the story everyone had written about her in their minds. The underestimation that had surrounded her earlier was giving way to respect and genuine appreciation. Her music was no longer just sound. It had become a statement, a revelation of who she truly was. She allowed the melody to shift, moving from delicate, soft passages to more powerful, expressive chords. The audience was captivated, some leaning closer, others closing their eyes to immerse themselves fully in the sound. Each movement of her fingers was precise, yet filled with emotion, and the room seemed to pause in acknowledgement of the unexpected talent before them. For those who had doubted her, it was a lesson in humility. For others, it was an invitation to witness something extraordinary. As the piece progressed, she noticed the subtle changes in the expressions of her audience. A woman in a shimmering gown covered her mouth in awe, unable to hide her admiration. A man who had been speaking confidently moments before now seemed lost in thought, clearly moved by the performance. Even the hosts, who had called her to play with casual expectation, now stood quietly, captivated by the depth of her talent. The entire room had shifted, from a place of casual conversation to one of shared experience, all because of the music flowing from her hands. She paused briefly between passages, letting the soft echoes linger in the hall. The audience seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next note. She smiled faintly, feeling a sense of connection with the people around her. A bond created not through words or status, but through the universal language of music. It was a moment of pure communication, one that transcended the assumptions and judgments that had filled the room earlier. Continuing, she introduced a gentle variation in the melody, blending soft, delicate passages with stronger, more assertive chords. The contrast drew the audience in further, keeping their attention fixed on her every movement. Each note seemed to tell a story, revealing layers of skill and emotion that could not be ignored. She was no longer just a guest at the party. She was the center of attention, a quiet force commanding admiration and respect. Guests began to lean toward one another, whispering quietly about her talent, trying to understand how someone they had dismissed could perform with such skill. The room was filled with a mixture of awe and curiosity, and she could sense the subtle shift in dynamics. Those who had underestimated her were now reconsidering their assumptions, while others were simply enjoying the music, caught in its beauty and depth. She allowed herself to feel a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the moment she had anticipated had finally arrived. As the piece reached its climax, her fingers moved with confidence and precision, each chord ringing clearly through the hall. The audience was captivated, completely absorbed in the music. She noticed heads turning, eyes widening, and subtle nods of appreciation. The effect was more profound than she had imagined. The underestimation that had surrounded her was completely transformed into admiration and respect. She had commanded the room without a word, proving her worth through skill, emotion, and presence. Finally, she allowed the music to fade gently, each note lingering in the air before silence took over. The room remained quiet for a brief, suspended moment, as if everyone was processing what had just happened. Then, one by one, people began to applaud, their claps building in volume and intensity. The applause was genuine, filled with admiration and surprise. She rose from the piano with a calm smile, acknowledging the audience with a subtle nod. She had transformed the room, and the energy of the party had shifted completely. People approached her, some with words of praise, others with quiet, respectful admiration. The host smiled broadly, clearly pleased by the unexpected brilliance she had brought to the evening. Conversations resumed, but now they were framed around her performance, her talent, and the way she had captured the attention of everyone present. The underestimation that had defined the early part of the night was gone, replaced by recognition and respect. She remained humble, letting her music speak for her, knowing that her presence had made a lasting impression. Even those who had initially dismissed her could not ignore the talent and confidence she had displayed. Whispers of amazement continued to ripple through the room, and several guests lingered near the piano, eager to ask questions or learn more about the musician who had so effortlessly captured their attention. She engaged with them politely, sharing just enough to satisfy curiosity while keeping the focus on the music rather than herself. The performance had shifted the energy of the entire evening, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her skill had spoken louder than any assumption. As the applause finally subsided, she stepped back, letting the piano sit quietly, its polished surface reflecting the warm light of the chandeliers. The guests continued their conversations, but now there was a shared acknowledgement of what had just occurred. She had turned the tide of perception, taking the room from casual dismissal to genuine admiration. The music had spoken in a way that words could not, revealing talent, confidence, and a quiet strength that had been underestimated by everyone at the start of the evening. She allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, feeling the satisfaction of a performance well done. The night was far from over, but she had already made an indelible mark. The underestimation that had surrounded her was replaced by respect, curiosity, and a newfound recognition of her abilities. She had stepped into a world that had not expected her to shine, and she had done so with grace, skill, and presence. The piano had become her voice, and through it, she had transformed the party into a space where talent and emotion took precedence over assumptions and judgment. As the last notes lingered in the air, a wave of silence followed, broken only by the soft rustling of guests shifting in their seats. The room, which had been filled with casual chatter and polite laughter, now hummed with awe and admiration. Eyes that had barely acknowledged her earlier were fixed on her, some wide with surprise, others glistening with genuine appreciation. She rose slowly from the piano, her movements calm and composed, allowing the audience to absorb the performance they had just witnessed. Conversations began to resume, but the tone had shifted entirely. Guests who had been dismissive moments ago now whispered excitedly to each other, exchanging observations about the unexpected brilliance of her music. A woman who had been standing with her arms crossed earlier now leaned forward, her expression a mixture of curiosity and admiration. A man in a tailored suit, who had barely given her a second glance when she entered the room, now spoke in hushed tones to a colleague, clearly impressed by the depth of her skill. The atmosphere had transformed from casual socializing to one of genuine engagement. She moved gracefully through the crowd, receiving polite nods and quiet compliments. Many approached her directly, offering praise that felt sincere and thoughtful. "That was extraordinary," one guest said softly, her voice filled with admiration. "You have such control and emotion in your playing. It's unlike anything I've heard tonight." She smiled faintly, acknowledging the compliment without arrogance, letting the music speak for itself. The recognition felt different from the polite acknowledgement she had received earlier. This was respect earned through talent, not assumed through status. Some guests who had initially dismissed her now sought to understand more about her background. They asked where she had studied, what inspired her, and how she had developed such skill. She answered calmly, sharing pieces of her journey without overwhelming them with details. Her tone remained modest, yet every word carried a quiet confidence that drew further attention. Those who had underestimated her were now learning that there was far more to her than they had imagined. A few of the more influential guests lingered near her, clearly intrigued by her presence. They asked thoughtful questions, not just about her music but about her experiences and perspective. She responded honestly, sharing insights about her journey and the discipline it had required. The conversations were different from those earlier in the evening. They were deeper, more genuine, and filled with curiosity rather than polite obligation. She realized that her performance had opened doors, creating opportunities for meaningful interaction in ways she had not anticipated. The host approached, a broad smile on their face, clearly impressed by the unexpected impact of her music. "You truly changed the evening," they said warmly. "I did not expect such a performance. You have captivated everyone here." She nodded graciously, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Her presence, once underestimated, had become central to the energy of the room. The music had served as a bridge, connecting her to the guests in a way that words alone could not. She noticed subtle changes in the demeanor of those around her. Guests who had initially assumed she was inexperienced now treated her with respect, seeking her perspective and inviting her into conversations. The energy of the room had shifted from casual observation to genuine interest. Her music had not only captured attention, but had also elevated the perception of her abilities, revealing a depth that could not be ignored. She moved through the space with ease, aware of the transformation that had taken place. Small groups formed around her, engaging in thoughtful discussions about music, performance, and personal experiences. She listened attentively, contributing when appropriate, but allowing the dialogue to flow naturally. The curiosity of the guests was sincere, and she found herself enjoying the exchange. The party, which had once seemed intimidating and unwelcoming, had become a place of connection, understanding, and mutual respect. She realized that her talent had created a unique bridge between her and a group of people who had underestimated her from the start. A few guests who had been particularly skeptical approached her hesitantly, their expressions a mixture of surprise and humility. They admitted that they had expected little from someone who seemed so quiet and unassuming. She received their words with calm acknowledgement, understanding that such realizations were a natural part of the experience. Her goal had never been to prove anyone wrong but to express herself fully and authentically. The response she received now was a gratifying confirmation that authenticity could command attention and respect in ways that performance alone could not. The evening continued, and she found herself increasingly surrounded by engaged listeners. Guests asked her about the pieces she had played, her inspirations, and her journey as a musician. She shared her experiences with warmth and humility, creating a dialogue that felt both personal and meaningful. The atmosphere had shifted from superficial engagement to genuine connection, and she recognized that her music had been the catalyst for this change. The people who had underestimated her were now fully aware of her presence and skill, and the energy in the room reflected this acknowledgement. She moved back toward the piano occasionally, allowing her fingers to hover over the keys, ready to provide subtle accompaniment or a gentle improvisation. Each note she played reinforced the respect and admiration that had grown around her. The audience responded with attentive silence, punctuated by soft murmurs of appreciation. The transition from underestimation to recognition was complete, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in witnessing the transformation firsthand. Her music had not only captured attention but had also fostered a deeper understanding and respect for her abilities. Some guests approached with offers of collaboration, mentorship, or opportunities to perform at other events. She listened thoughtfully, considering each offer with care and appreciation. The respect and interest she had earned were not fleeting. They had created real possibilities for the future. She had entered the evening underestimated and unnoticed, but she was leaving with a network of connections and a sense of empowerment that few could have predicted. The impact of her presence was tangible, and the gratitude she felt for the opportunity was immense. Throughout the remainder of the night, she maintained a composed and humble demeanor, allowing her interactions to be guided by genuine interest and warmth. She engaged with guests on topics beyond music, sharing insights and experiences that reflected her thoughtful nature. The party had transformed from a place of casual socializing to a space of meaningful connection, all because she had chosen to embrace her talent and step into the spotlight when the moment arose. Her journey from underestimated guest to admired musician was a testament to the power of authenticity, skill, and quiet confidence. As the evening drew to a close, the guests continued to express their admiration and appreciation. Many lingered to exchange personal words, acknowledging the profound impact of her performance. She accepted their praise with grace, aware that the true reward lay not in recognition alone but in the connections she had forged and the respect she had earned. The transformation she had witnessed in the room was a reflection of the power of talent and authenticity to transcend assumptions and preconceived notions. She glanced around the hall one final time, taking in the changed energy, the conversations that now included her perspective, and the genuine engagement of the guests. The underestimation that had surrounded her at the beginning of the evening had been completely replaced by admiration, respect, and curiosity. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had not only showcased her talent, but had also created meaningful connections and left a lasting impression on those who had once doubted her. With a final nod to the hosts and a quiet smile to the guests, she stepped away from the piano, feeling a sense of calm triumph. The room had been transformed by her music, and she had been transformed in the process, gaining confidence, recognition, and the knowledge that her presence and skill were undeniable. The night had begun with underestimation and quiet doubt, but it had evolved into an evening of admiration, connection, and genuine appreciation. She left the party with a sense of accomplishment and empowerment, knowing that her talent and authenticity had spoken louder than any assumption or expectation. The night had grown quieter as it approached its end, but the energy she had created lingered in the air. Guests moved in smaller clusters now, conversations filled with reflections on the evening, and the soft glow of the chandeliers gave the hall a warm, almost intimate feeling. She walked through the crowd, feeling a sense of calm pride. The transformation from the moment she had arrived to now was remarkable. From being underestimated and barely noticed, she had become someone whose presence was genuinely acknowledged and respected. Several guests approached her, some with genuine curiosity, others with offers of opportunity. A few invited her to perform at future events, expressing their admiration not only for her talent, but for the grace and authenticity she had shown throughout the evening. She listened politely, grateful for the recognition but careful not to let it overwhelm her. Each offer and compliment was a reminder that her skills and her composure had made an impact, one that extended beyond the notes she had played on the piano. The host of the evening came over, smiling warmly, their expression reflecting genuine appreciation. "You truly made tonight unforgettable," they said. "I have hosted many events, but this is something special. Thank you for sharing your gift." She smiled, a quiet, humble smile that conveyed gratitude without boasting. The acknowledgement meant a great deal, not for validation, but because it confirmed that her presence and her talent had been recognized in a world that had initially underestimated her. She glanced around the room, noticing the subtle changes in demeanor. Guests who had initially judged her superficially now interacted with her with genuine interest and respect. Their assumptions had been challenged, and they were responding with openness and admiration. The energy in the room was lighter, warmer, and filled with a sense of genuine connection. It was clear that her performance had not only captured attention but had also fostered a shift in perspective, creating a space where people were engaging on a deeper, more authentic level. Some guests lingered, asking her questions about her background, the training that had shaped her, and the experiences that had led to her remarkable skill. She responded thoughtfully, sharing stories of dedication, practice, and the quiet moments that had defined her journey. Her words were sincere, and her tone reflected the humility and confidence she carried naturally. The curiosity of the guests was heartfelt, and she felt a quiet joy in being able to share her experiences with those who were genuinely interested. A small group gathered near the piano, discussing the pieces she had performed and the emotions they had evoked. They spoke with enthusiasm, dissecting the music not only technically but emotionally, showing that they truly appreciated the depth of her talent. She listened, occasionally adding insights, enjoying the interaction and the chance to connect with people who now saw her not as an underestimated guest, but as a skilled and accomplished musician. The respect in their voices and the attentiveness in their expressions were clear indicators of the transformation that had occurred. She moved through the crowd with ease, engaging in light conversation, responding to compliments, and sharing thoughtful reflections on the evening. The earlier moments of nervousness and doubt had completely vanished, replaced by a serene confidence. She realized that the night had taught her something important: patience, authenticity, and the willingness to embrace one's abilities in the right moment could shift perceptions in profound ways. Her presence had become a catalyst for recognition, connection, and genuine appreciation. As the evening drew to its close, she was approached by a few influential guests who had observed her quietly throughout the night. They expressed interest in learning more about her work, offering potential collaborations and invitations to perform at prestigious events. She listened attentively, acknowledging each proposal with gratitude and careful consideration. The possibilities that were now opening up were a direct result of the moment she had stepped into the spotlight, transforming underestimation into opportunity. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not from the admiration itself, but from the awareness that her talent had created meaningful connections. The evening had been a journey from quiet observation to commanding attention, from being overlooked to being genuinely respected. Each interaction, each compliment, and each offer was a reflection of the authenticity and skill she had brought to the party, and she recognized that her calm presence had been as impactful as her music. The host approached one final time, offering sincere thanks and encouragement. "You have a rare gift, not just in your music, but in the way you connect with people. You have left a lasting impression on everyone here tonight." She accepted the words with humility, feeling a quiet satisfaction that went beyond recognition. She understood that the evening was a reminder of the power of authenticity, talent, and composure, and she carried that lesson with her as she prepared to leave the hall. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt a sense of accomplishment and peace. The streets were quiet, and the lights of the city reflected softly in the distance. She reflected on the journey of the evening, from the initial moments of underestimation to the final moments of acknowledgement and respect. It had been a night that revealed not only her abilities, but also the potential within every moment to surprise, connect, and leave a lasting impact. She thought about the subtle moments throughout the night, the glances that had underestimated her, the whispers that had dismissed her presence, and the eventual transformation of those same perceptions into admiration. Each step of the evening had been a testament to patience, preparation, and authenticity. She realized that sometimes, the most profound impact comes not from asserting oneself loudly, but from quietly letting one's talents and character shine when the moment calls for it. The night had provided more than recognition. It had offered opportunities for growth, collaboration, and connection. Guests who had once overlooked her were now interested in learning from her, engaging with her, and including her in experiences that she had only observed from the periphery. The journey from underestimation to acknowledgement had been complete, and she felt a quiet sense of empowerment. Her talent had spoken louder than assumptions, and her presence had created genuine human connection. As she walked away from the building, the sounds of the party fading behind her, she carried with her the understanding that respect and recognition were earned through authenticity and skill, not assumed through status or appearances. She felt a renewed sense of confidence, knowing that her abilities could open doors and create meaningful impact in any setting. The night had been a powerful reminder that being true to oneself, patient, and ready to embrace opportunities could transform perception and lead to extraordinary outcomes. The journey of the evening remained vivid in her mind. The initial moments of doubt and nervousness, the anticipation of the piano performance, the transformative power of her music, and the genuine admiration that followed. She knew that the experiences and connections she had gained were not fleeting. They were lasting impressions that would influence the relationships and opportunities she encountered in the future. The underestimation she had faced was not a barrier but a stepping stone, leading to recognition, respect, and the affirmation of her true abilities. Walking through the quiet streets, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on the lessons learned. Talent, when combined with patience, authenticity, and the courage to embrace one's abilities, had the power to change perceptions, foster genuine connections, and open doors that had previously seemed closed. The night had demonstrated this truth in a clear and unforgettable way. She felt gratitude for the opportunity, for the challenges, and for the moment when she had stepped forward to let her music speak for her. By the time she reached her destination, the city had settled into a calm rhythm. She paused for a moment, looking up at the night sky, reflecting on the journey from being underestimated to being celebrated. The experiences of the evening had reinforced her belief in the power of quiet strength, talent, and authenticity. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had navigated the evening with grace, composure, and confidence, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had underestimated her. The story of the night would remain with her, not just as a memory of recognition, but as a reminder of the importance of patience, preparation, and staying true to oneself. She had entered the evening quietly, underestimated and unnoticed, and she left with acknowledgement, respect, and a renewed sense of empowerment. Her music had been the catalyst for this transformation, but it was her presence, authenticity, and quiet confidence that had truly made the difference. As she stepped into the quiet of her home, she felt a sense of calm and accomplishment. The evening had been more than an event. It had been a journey of transformation, recognition, and human connection. The lessons she had learned and the experiences she had gained would stay with her, guiding her in future endeavors and reminding her of the power of talent, authenticity, and the courage to shine when the moment calls. The underestimation she had faced had been transformed into admiration, respect, and opportunity, leaving her with a profound sense of fulfillment and hope for the future.